Hey, how you doing? Justin here. Today we're going to be talking about combining major scale patterns, particularly pattern 1 and pattern 2. If you're following my Major Scale Maestro course, we've just learned pattern 2. So you want to start by doing a bit of time just on that pattern and not even think about combining it yet. So stage 1 will be getting confident with both patterns individually. If you're not super confident in pattern 1, super confident in pattern 2, like making up a musical solo, you don't want to start combining them yet. So just stick around on pattern 2 for at least a week or two if it's new to you. Do the one finger solos in pattern 2 as well. Really get it comfortable. Get it hip with the sounds. Try and get that link between your musical imagination and your hand working so you can kind of hear where things might be going in the scale pattern. But of course, the point of learning more than one scale pattern is to combine them. Now, I've mentioned in previous lessons that they are in fact the same notes. So sometimes it's not just about the note, but how it feels and where it sits under your fingers compared with the notes that you've just come from and where your musical imagination is taking you. So it's definitely worth practicing combining them. And what most people find is that there are certain little pathways between different patterns that fall naturally under their fingers, and they tend to use them a whole lot, and that's okay. We've all got pet licks. We've all got little phrases that feel nice under our fingers that are likely to come up more often than others. But when it comes to combining scale patterns, I would really recommend that you spend a bit of time working on restrictions so that you can practice joining up the scale in as many different places as you can. It'll make you a lot more rounded and it'll give you this kind of idea of it being one pattern. Because if I'm improvising within a scale, I'm not really trying to think about scales at all, but the idea of it being one pattern and then another pattern doesn't really happen. It's just a combination. It does happen, say, if I'm playing a complicated jazz tune and there are a lot of key changes and I'm having to stay in my thinky space in my head, but I don't like that space, and I'd recommend that you work on practicing scales to the point where you don't have to think about it. Okay, that's the point of all of this. And when you start deliberately trying to combine different patterns, you'll find that it helps join them into one, and it'll also help your ear kind of hear whether you're stepping back a tone or a semitone or stepping up a tone or a semitone. And that's one of those things that you want when you're improvising is even if you don't know what the next pattern is, your ear will kind of help you decide whether you need to move up a tone or a semitone. I think it's restrictions that are the key to doing this. And I tried to do it in that little intro thing there just to give you a bit of an example. But what I would recommend is that you start off on the 4th string. So if we look at a close-up there, we've got here, there's the root note there on the 5th fret, and we've got pattern 1 behind, and pattern 2 is moving up. Okay, so we've just essentially got these 4 notes. Now, particularly for any of you that are still struggling a little bit with the root note, it can be really, really helpful to be doing that, particularly on this 4th string, to try and solidify the position of that root note for your pattern 2. So I just made up a little loop there. It's going G, D, E minor, C, just using bar chords and a slightly kind of reggae kind of feel, I guess. But I would recommend that you try and give at least, say, a couple of minutes on each string or pair of strings. And I'd recommend that you start just with that 4th string. So you might be doing something along these lines. Something that hopefully some of you are noticing is I'm using a lot of repetition there, and I'm also using a lot of reactive listening. Now, I understand what's going on here as well. Like I'm starting on a G chord, and I've got that G note. The second chord I'm playing is a D, which has this note F sharp in it. It's a note in the key of D. So therefore, in the chord of D rather. So hitting that note on the second chord works really well. Now, I know that, but I'm not using my brain to find that. I'm just mucking around with it and letting my fingers and my ears guide me to the notes that are good. And when I'm realizing there that the good notes, so I'm trying to target them a little bit more over those particular chords. The idea of repetition is also a really nice way of doing that, like repeating one little phrase and then off to target a note that is part of the chord that you'll figure out as you go along. Again, you shouldn't know this, you shouldn't think about it. You're using your reactive listening here to try and figure that out. So that was just string 4. Then I would recommend you have a go at doing the same thing, but just on string 3. Now, this is a nice note to start off on, the note B, because it's part of, again, our G chord. Okay, so that's a kind of a good starting point on this particular chord progression anyway. So that's a nice one to start, and then just see, it's the same pattern in fact, the same pattern of notes as that we had on the 4th string. So same idea, again, same chord progression. Just the same idea. I'm trying to look for these little ideas, explore that pattern, linking those two shapes so they're kind of becoming one. I then recommend that you combine strings 3 and 4. Okay, so you just middle 2 strings, same progression, same idea, middle 2 strings. My phone bleating there in the middle of that, I don't know why, but you get the idea. So we did just string 4, then we did strings 3 and 4 together, then you would go on to doing string 2, then 1 and 2 together, and then the thinnest 4 strings. That would be a kind of a nice recommendation as to how to build up the idea of restrictions to really get to know the patterns. I find the middle 2 strings are really good ones to work on first of all, because that's the most common place people kind of transition, is through the middle of a pattern. The thinner string as well, a lot of people like staying on just the thinner string, so that can be kind of a fun thing. If you want to get into exploring dyads, like 2 notes played at the same time, that can be quite a fun thing as well. Later on you're going to get into thirds and sixths, and there's loads of other tools that you can use. But to start off with, again, like I keep saying it over and over again, get simple things sounding really good. Don't be in a hurry to try and do too many complicated things. Just work on simple stuff that sounds really good. Okay? Thinner string, again, say exactly the same idea, thinner string. Now, something happened there, which I kind of thought might happen, and it did happen actually exactly how I wanted to, which is my ears took me away from the thing I was supposed to be doing. So I was trying to practice just on the thinner string, but my musical imagination wanted the line to move over onto the next string. Now, I would encourage allowing that to happen. I don't think it's a good idea to try and stop your musical imagination. If you can hear an idea, have an idea for a melody, then you want to try and find it as best you can. Now, some of these examples I'm finding kind of fun personally, because I'm really trying to let musical imagination roll, but within a restriction. And so my fingers sometimes feel like they're jumping to it, because it's not I think the expression of a musical idea is the most important thing that you can develop as part of this process. So don't, even if you've got a restriction when you're practicing, don't stop the musical imagination if it takes you somewhere else. So you've got plenty of time in your life to let that restriction explore the movement between those two different patterns. But if your musical imagination and your hand are connected and you're finding a line, then just like go with it. See how long you can hold on to that idea and develop it, because I think for me it's the most satisfying part of it when I'm improvising and I really feel like I've got something going on that is happening in my imagination that's coming out of my hands. That's the thing that I'm always on the search for. So try and cultivate a scenario where that can happen. And I think that doing this major scale course with me, I'm really hoping that's what will start to develop. And even though we're going to spend a lot of time on restrictions and trying to refine a very specific area that we're working in, if that musical imagination starts to take over and you hear an idea, follow it through, stay with it, try and ride that wave as long as you can, because they don't usually last forever. Your fingers eventually fall off or the melody stops or whatever. So do try and get used to sticking with it as long as you can. You've almost certainly noticed that I'm using a variety of different techniques to move between the patterns. The most common one that I'm using is sliding, and I think it's definitely a good one to get hip with. Sounds really cool. It feels nice to do it. Remember that you've got to hold the pressure down with your finger while you do it. I think most people figure that out, but I inevitably get a question or two about the sliding. So whenever you're sliding, just remember to play a note. Think about where you're sliding to. It's not just a random slide. You're thinking of sliding from here to here. And you need to keep the pressure down with that finger. If you're sliding a long way, you want to look where you're going to. So if I'm sliding from here to here, when I'm here, my eyes are already looking at the 7th fret. They're already there. Because if I follow my finger, when it gets to the 7th fret, it might overrun and you end up getting a bit wonky. So eyes at 7th and then slide up. Okay, it's definitely worth practicing that a little bit if you're going to get involved with doing bigger, longer distance sliding, which you don't have to. Do remember that you can also step, so you don't always have to go to slide. You can go. There's so many different kind of textures that you can get here, and you should be exploring all of them. I think, like I said, sliding is a nice, fairly easy one to get under the fingers, but stepping, just like not sliding, also just as effective. Just see, again, you're training up your musical imagination here to hear different ideas, so don't feel like you have to only do sliding or you have to only do stepping. There are, well, I was going to say hundreds, probably not hundreds, but loads of different concepts that you can use for stepping between different scales, and we're going to touch on more of them in this course. But to start off with, I'd look at just stepping and sliding. So it's time to look at our Unit 3 homework, and we're going to start off with 5 minutes on the scale practice. So we're going to start just on pattern 2. So exploring the different fingering option, working out if the fingering that I've suggested is going to work for you. If not, what fingering are you going to use? Of course, using all down picks to start off with, making sure you always get it right. No mistakes. Do it slow enough, there's no mistakes. Eventually getting it to the metronome, 1 note per metronome click, then 8th notes, that's 2 notes per metronome click. Maybe moving it up to 4 notes per metronome click if you happen to have great synchronization between your hand and reasonable chops. After maybe a week or 2 weeks just on pattern 2, I would alternate practice sessions working on pattern 2, then pattern 1, pattern 2, then pattern 1 for the full 5 minutes on each pattern, and eventually moving into practicing both patterns within the same practice slot. Now, you want to be really confident with both of the patterns before you do that. Once you get to that stage, if you want to practice pattern 1 4 times, then pattern 2 4 times, and then alternate between them, that's fine. Really, it's up to you. I will be giving you some really cool examples later on about how to navigate. Once we've got all 5 patterns, there's a nice little trick that I've got where you go up one pattern, down the next, and up the neck and back down and cycling around. It's loads of fun, but let's save that for a little later on. So that's your first 5 minutes. Part 2 of your practice is going to be 5 minutes of improvising with a backing track. You want to to start just in pattern 2. Start just like we did with pattern 1, with just using the regular fingering for the scale, playing it up and down, getting used to what it feels like, making sure you don't trip over your fingers, that you're getting all the notes right still. When you feel confident with that, you could move into doing the one finger solo, so using one finger, all still in pattern 2, really solidifying the pattern of the shape in your imagination, so you're really clear with how it goes. Only when you're confident with playing with one finger in pattern 2, you might like to start exploring pattern 1 and 2 combined. If you want to just have a bit of fun and muck around moving patterns in between, no one's going to get hurt, but try and spend a bit of time on the restrictions that I talked about, just focusing on string 4, then 3 and 4 together, then string 1 and then string 2, and then 1 and 2 together, and then the thinnest 4 strings. I think that's a nice set. Moving from string 2 to 3, some people find awkward because of that little step over. So if that's something that you find a little bit weird, I'd give some practice time to that as well. It really is about finding your weaknesses and then trying to work on those as much as it is me suggesting things. But definitely restrictions and then working on that, to help you link those patterns up, I think is a really strong idea. Do try and keep it musical. So allow your musical imagination to guide your hand, even if it means you're moving outside of the restrictions. Look for motives, look for space, look for repetition, development of an idea. All of those things when you're playing, they want to be kind of in the front of your imagination when you're improvising. Don't just treat it like a mechanical exercise where you're moving between the patterns. You're trying to be musical in your improvisation. You don't want it to become just too thinky and too technical. It should be you trying to tap into that musical imagination, that magic where you start to hear a musical idea and you can express it out your fingers. That's what you're digging around for in all of this stuff. So make sure you keep that present, that those things like space and, trying to feel it out a little bit, trying to get in touch with it. It is totally all right, of course, to do technical focused practice as well, even as part of improvising, but especially if you get into like harder jazz things and playing over multiple chord changes and stuff. You will have to spend time improvising in a technical environment where you have to think a lot, and you want to keep doing it until you don't have to think a lot, right? So at this stage, if you're just learning the major scale, it's okay to go, right, I'm just going to use pattern 1 and pattern 2, finger 1, and I'm going to work on just the 3rd string, go, and then spending a whole 5 minutes on that. That's beneficial. But you also want to try and keep it loose enough that the musical imagination can kick in. And if you happen to catch a wave accidentally, just ride it. Just let that, let the melody flow as long as you can before you have to jump off your board, Not that I'm a good surfer. I want to give that impression I'm pretty hopeless at surfing. I can stand up and kind of go along, but as usual, all of this stuff is laid out over on the website, so do go and check it out. You'll find the practice schedule. You'll find that you can use the practice assistant over there as well, so you can keep tabs on what it is that you should be doing. There are, of course, some diagrams and stuff to help you out as well, so do go and check that out. If you're over on YouTube, always appreciate the subscription. Slap me a like. Let me know in the comments how you're getting on. And if you're over on the website, do post some clips of you guys playing this stuff. I want to see how you're doing. I want to get some feedback here on how you're enjoying the course and how you're doing, so I can see if there's other stuff that I need to put into the course to help you guys out as well. I'll see you for plenty more very soon. You'll take care of yourselves. Bye bye.